Okay. All right. Well, it's 11:32, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and people will come in as they will. Thank you for being here. I am Ann Bradley. I am the chair for our programs committee this year, and I'm super excited about our program today. So just to let everybody know, a couple housekeeping things. We are recording this, so it will be able to be seen later. And then also, this is an open Zoom meeting, so if everyone could please mute themselves and turn off their cameras, although I'm really enjoying the icons that Didiano has and Mike Muyo. That's, those are pretty awesome. So anyway, so just to give you an idea of what we're going to be doing today, it's a little bit different. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill Bullock in a minute, but we are going to do at 11:30 to 11:45, Bill is going to introduce our panelists. 11:45 to 12:30, we will have the program. From 12:30 to 12:45, we're going to have 4 breakout rooms, and you're randomly going to be selected and put into these breakout rooms with Deb, Julia, Bill, or Neil. And then at 12:45, we will come back as a group, and it'll be a 15-minute regroup, question and answer for the entire panel. So with that, I'm going to introduce Bill. I'm so excited to have him as our moderator. Bill is responsible for leading the NC Biotech Center, teams that promote marketing, recruitment, expansion, and attraction of life science companies. In addition, Bill is part of the center's senior leadership team, driving strategic life science outcomes in innovation, investment, job solutions, and opportunities across North Carolina. Super excited for you to be here, Bill. Bill, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thanks, Ann. Everybody can hear me. I can see my crew. Give me a thumbs up, Julie. Can you hear me? All right, perfect. Yeah, first of all, Ann, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this. These are always fun things to do, particularly given the crew we're working with that I've known or gotten to know, and I learn a lot in these. I do have to say, though, normally, we have a big auditorium here at the Biotech Center, so usually I'm, mic'd up and walking around and doing my thing, so it's a little bit weird to just be standing here by myself in my office with my door closed, but I'm glad to virtually be with everyone. As I mentioned and Ann noted, we have a great panel. The topic, as you all know, is life science and commercial real estate, pre-COVID to present, a pandemic-proof sector. So that's a big topic. As Ann mentioned, this is what I do every day, wake up trying to think about how we can continue to expand and grow the life science industry in the state. And while real estate has always obviously been a really important part of that equation, I think part of what we're going to talk about today will really show how important it's become, and particularly where we are right now. So the very first thing I'm going to do, though, is I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves and just briefly talk a little bit about what they do, why they're here, and why we care, right? So as you know, we have Neil Sharon. Neil's Senior Director in Portfolio Leasing at Longfellow. We've got Julia Gennaro. Julia's a Senior Architect at Clark Nexon. And Deb Boucher, and Deb and I have known each other a long time, so I'm excited to go and have this hour and a half to spend learning a little bit more about what she knows. And Deb is Executive Director at Cushman Wakefield. So, without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Neil. And Neil, if you can give a quick intro, and then Julia, if you can go after Neil, and Deb, if you can close it out, that'd be great. So, Neil, it's all yours.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Just want to have a little technology check here. Yeah, Neil Sharon. I feel like I know a lot of you as I'm here in this market. Work with Longfellow Real Estate Partners out of here, but oversee all of the leasing activities for our national portfolio. We've grown quite a bit over the last 7-8 years. We're about 5 million square feet now. Mainly focused in the Raleigh-Durham market, Boston, San Francisco, Palo Alto, San Diego, but have a really strong obviously presence here and continue to and have a plan to continue to grow in this market. So we're about just over about 2.5 million square feet now in the Raleigh-Durham market. So excited to participate in this panel.
Thanks, Neil. So for anyone I don't know, my name is Julia Schnero. I'm an architect with Clark Nexen. As a firm, we do a pretty wide variety of work with education and corporate clients. For myself, my focus in my career has been on science and technology work. So that's kind of run the gamut from higher education to corporate clients. Fortunately, in this area, we get to do both types of work, and there's a lot of reciprocity between the two. And then within S&T, I kind of have a special focus on health, wellness, and sustainability for those facilities. And I think that's of growing interest in a lot of the local clients as well. I would just note that, like, I think this is kind of a really exciting topic. One, not just because how this science and technology and the biotechnology affects our local economy, but also the opportunity for the really great talent we have in real estate and design and construction here, and how we can kind of be a local resource for kind of these international groups. So I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia. Hey guys, I'm Deb Boucher, and I lead a science and technology specialized team here at Cushman & Wakefield in the Research Triangle Park area. And I also help lead the national practice group. And I've been dedicated to this sector for, gosh, a decade and a half, and have been in the commercial real estate for close to 2. So, I mean, all that really means is that I'm getting old, but yeah, happy to be here and look forward to conversation. Back to you, Bill.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Deb. So before we jump right in, I was just going to note too that the work that that we do here at the center around this economic development piece, it has been, kind of a framework. It's been a very exciting time. I mean, as I'm sure most of you know, North Carolina, and in particular the Triangle region, is clearly one of the domestic, if not international, hubs for life sciences. It kind of depends on how you count that as to, are we a 3, or are we a 5, or are we a 8, are we a 10? But it goes without saying that, we're clearly a place that has been on the map for a while. And I think really in our experience with work on a number of projects over the last, especially 5 to 10 years, the segment is really, really growing. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, why that is. But, here we are in some interesting times, right? So let's just get right to it. And I'm going to start with Neil on the first question. Neil, what actually in the life science space has changed from your perspective as a developer since March? What's different in COVID?
Yeah.
What's this market look like now?
So I'll hit some high notes, and then I'm sure that we'll dive into details with Julia and Deb's expertise. But I think a couple things come to mind. One is the kind of the first is workplace. There's obviously going to be changes in workplace. There'll be layout changes, design changes, and there'll be the changes in the way people social distance in labs. In their offices, there'll be changes around people doing more shift work, and having people distance within the current lab space they have. We anticipate there'll be a demand for larger spaces, so maybe tenants are going to grow their footprint simply to accommodate social distancing and safe practices in their lab space. Early on in the pandemic, I got a call from a very good client of ours, and he called me and said, I need to double my space like in the next month. I'll take whatever you have. And fortunately, we didn't have any available lab space, which is another problem that we'll probably get to later in the panel. But he simply wanted to spread his workforce out so that he could continue to have operational labs and research. I think another area that we're seeing change is the way companies are acting around leasing and purchasing. I think companies will probably preserve more cash, especially the startups and the younger groups will preserve more cash and are more likely to lease space. With some of the more mature groups maybe continuing in the same manner of lease versus purchase. But we anticipate there'll be continued strong demand in the leasing world. And then, initially in the leasing world, there were some delays, and Deb can probably speak to that as well. When COVID first hit, people didn't really know what was going to happen. So, a lot of those requirements went from very active to very quiet, but they've picked back up. And I think a lot of those deals are probably transacted, and would like to hear Deb's take on that as well. And then I think, continued focus on R&D. Obviously there is a COVID demand for a therapeutic, so we can all get back to daily life. But I think it's spotlighted other underlying issues, and there'll be continued focus with NIH funding, with startups, working to continue to solve, some of the underlying issues that that COVID brings to the forefront. So I think those are the main changes that I've seen since COVID. I think we'll probably talk about some of the fundamentals that pre-existed COVID that are beneficial to what we're talking about relative to the life science market in RDU through that have remained true through COVID. But those are the changes that I've noticed.
Thanks, Neil. So, Deb, you were busy before COVID. You're busy during COVID. Pick up where Neil left off and talk a little bit about what you're seeing in this new COVID world in life sciences around our region.
Yeah, no, thanks, Bill. I mean, this is a really interesting panel, right? Because you're seeing sort of the reaction from two different sides. And I think Neil has a very nuanced, like he sees, kind of a different side, the other side of the deal. On our side, I can just kind of cut right to the chase. Like we saw no change with COVID. I mean, it was a very robust and active sector, prior, like you just said, and we really just, have been business as usual. We continued, and I would go so far as to say, at least in our practice, and what we've seen nationwide, at least amongst, my colleagues at Cushman & Wakefield, is that there was almost no slowdown in deal velocity, around the country, as well as in the Research Triangle Park area, as long as it had a component of highly specialized space, i.e. R&D lab, GMP manufacturing, greenhouse, something like that. It did not slow down. And, again, one of my really good clients used a very simple made a very simple statement, and she said, we can't lab from home. All the office stuff, we can get them to stay at home, we can do virtual, we use technology, but like I cannot build out a little lab in each person's garage and then run our business. So, they were forced to, figure out ways, again, with human behavior and titrating back how many people would be in one place at one time, et cetera. But from a real estate, use point of view, if you had laboratory or, kind of the highly technical space, you had to still proceed, and you really couldn't slow down on acquiring it or, proceeding with the build out, et cetera, because again, while we are looking at unknowns for the next, at that time, what was it, 3, 6, 9 months, these are companies that are in it for the long haul of, taking 12 years to get a drug to market type of a world. So, they couldn't do nothing for a year and then, keep, pick up where that left off. So, the short answer is really that we have not seen a huge impact, to our kind of normal everyday volume and, kind of operations based upon the COVID pandemic.
So that's good news. So I don't know if people knew that. So one of the things that's good about coming to this panel is we're going to have some good news for a while here anyway. So stay tuned. I think similar from the angle that I see, and that is, kind of the more traditional site selection recruitment process within the state, where you get a call from a site selection consultant or a company calls and says, hey, we're looking to come into the market. And then, of course, I would reach out to everybody that's on this call to help make this happen. But, we haven't seen a slowdown either, actually. So, which I think reflects a lot of what we're talking about. So I want to go to Julia now. And so Julia, we've heard a couple of things. Deb just talking about how this pace, this velocity has continued as long as there was kind of an element of highly specialized space. We're obviously in a new world. You can't lab from home. What are you seeing? You have a little different perspective, from kind of a usage, design, utilization perspective. What are some of the things you're seeing that are reflected in the marketplace in this COVID time from a lab perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. So just kind of through the conversations we've had over the last week between the panelists, kind of hearing from Deb and Neil and you, I've been thinking about it. And, pre-pandemic, I see the architect as, big picture, that things we're really charged with are, one, enabling the type of work that needs to happen within the space, and two, enabling the culture that a client wants to develop for the staff and the faculty or whoever's working there. And so from the point of view of enabling the work, within that wet lab, Deb is completely right. You can't lab at home, and it's really not recommended or safe to do so, so please don't. But from that point of view, how are we developing these labs? It's no surprise to hear the word flexibility. So when a pandemic happens, when COVID happens, are our labs planned around one specific PI, or are they able to flexibly adapt to whatever priorities or research funding or grant money is out there that should direct that lab? And can it do so in a way that does not require a full-scale renovation to the lab? And that's really a priority that was probably in process before, but something like the pandemic really brings that to the forefront. And then the other part to it is enabling the culture. So not the wet lab spaces, but the focus recently has really been on collaboration zones, on really like hoteling within a space. So it's not about kind of owning one specific workstation, but creating this very kind of like flexible space for people to be more office focused and collaboration component as they need, but that may not be really a safe environment for people if they're trying to keep their distance from each other. And so I don't think those spaces are going away, but how can a more open environment enable space from each other and also work back in the collaboration zone once this pandemic is over and people are feeling comfortable going back to their spaces? So I think the stress for a lot of owners right now is on how do we plan for a safe space for our colleagues right now, and knowing that they have to come into the office, but also knowing that this will be over at some point in the future, and we don't want to be working in a space in 10 years where someone goes, oh yeah, this was designed in 2020 when we had to make sure that no one was near each other, right? So I think that it's a difficult challenge, but yeah, I don't have answers for it, but those are the kind of conversations we're having right now.
Bill, I can chime in here just a little bit to add on to what Julia's saying. I mean, Longfellow is in the process of writing a white paper on kind of some in conjunction with a couple architects on how lab design may change. And part of the way that we're implementing this is we're constantly building spec labs across the country. And we're dictating the design of those, and so we have the opportunity to make some changes now. And within the labs, we're doing things like locating fume hoods into alcoves and taking sinks out of islands and putting them on the walls. And what that allows folks to do is if they're conducting an experiment in a fume hood, they're not in an island where other researchers are walking behind them or by them constantly. If they're at a sink washing beakers, they're not in a place where they're constantly being bombarded with other folks walking around the lab. So trying to isolate some of those service centers within labs to get people out of the flow of other people so they can safely continue and conduct their work with this new world of trying to kind of manage where people are and manage the flow of air. And obviously, air is a big issue within labs. Fortunately, there's no really cleaner place to work than in a lab with 100% outside air, with the air being cleaned and exchanged multiple times an hour. So fortunately, in labs, that's where you'd want to be because the spaces are built to protect you. And protect the environment. So within the lab.
And Neil too, with moving, the water and then the fume hoods away from kind of the center, it ties into Julia's comment about the flexibility, which we've been seeing for many, many years, right? Getting the utilities up in the ceiling so that you could have flexible casework instead. But a lot of times you'd have like a couple that were flexible and furniture pieces, but then you'd still have the one that had the water right in the middle that you couldn't move around or not easily. So from your point of view, doing spec, it's all about the reusability, allowing, folks to have shorter terms, but being able to cycle it. And then that makes sense from a financial point of view. So I think that design also lends itself well for you to be able to make those commitments, i.e. speculatively building that space, which we need so badly right now. I mean, everywhere in the country.
If you have that flexible kind of zone in the middle, Deb, I mean, it could be as simple as actually literally taking benches out of the middle if you really want to reassure people that they're going to be 12 apart from each other, right? Or just saying we're not using this middle zone. And if there's nothing fixed in there, like a fume hood or a sink that people have to use, it's kind of a short-term way to deal with this situation and not have it be a long-term part of your infrastructure. So, I mean, when Neil said that the trend is for people looking for more space, that's definitely one of the solutions, but it's hard because like it's really expensive, right? I mean, lab space is so expensive to build. So the more of it that we need, it just gets, it's a tricky, it's probably the right solution, but it makes it a long-term financially difficult proposition.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous. Well, I think probably with any one of these topics we're going to cover, we could blow through the whole program time on it. So I'll move us a little bit on. So this is what I've taken from that conversation. We're busy. We were busy. We continue to be busy. We need more space, even in the pandemic. So from the perspective of the title of this, a pandemic-proof sector, it looks like it is. I mean, we are somewhat pandemic-proof, although Julia and you all talked a little bit about some of the changes and the challenges of thinking about how to adapt space to the new environment, and then how do you flex that going forward when you don't really know what forward looks like. But let's, for the sake of this discussion, say that we are that pandemic-proof sector. What I want to talk about now is let's talk a little bit about why. Why is life sciences a pandemic-proof sector, and what is it about the sector that makes it pandemic-proof, and what is it about this location and/or this location that has helped to make us, as we call, pandemic-proof? And again, Neil, I think I'll put you on the spot to jump in and kick us off on that question.
Yeah. So first, I'm going to knock on wood because I want to acknowledge how fortunate we are to be in this sector right now, and thus far we've been pandemic proof, and hopefully we won't have to deal with this again in the future. But I think some of the things that come to mind when I think about a pandemic proof industry sector, I think about our local region. I think about the diversity of companies within our region. I think about the fact that we have a tremendous amount of large cap companies. And we have Pfizer, Bayer, Glaxo, Biogen, Monsanto, the list goes on. We have startups, anyone from, I just saw yesterday or the day before, Bioaesthetics raised a bunch of money. Locus Bioscience, who's in our group, is not really a startup anymore, but what was at one point. So, I mean, the tremendous amount of a diversity around companies' stages throughout their drug discovery and market process. So we're very fortunate in that regard. I think we've seen an influx of other niches within the industry. So we've seen a large growth in gene therapy and cell therapy. Between AskBio, I'm just thinking about the ones that we've heard about recently. AskBio is in our portfolio. Again, Locus, Kriya, and the list really goes on and on. I mean, I could, and all of us could name, all those groups who are coming in, and now we're seeing some manufacturing requirements and biomanufacturing requirements with, Bluebird's move down from Boston, which was huge. Pfizer's here manufacturing their product from when they bought the Bamboo Therapeutics group. So it's been a tremendous diversification for us that naturally grew here, I think, based around some availability of great sites within the RTP where they could do this in a centralized location, but also technology that's spinning out, around CRISPR and other gene therapy platforms. I failed to mention Precision, but they're in downtown Durham and growing, and have really anchored downtown with Duke as a life science hub. And then I think the ag tech sector is continuing to emerge. I mean, Alexandria has done their ag tech campus in RTP, and that's been a big success. And NC State's focus and growth there, obviously other companies like we've seen come along, and Deb, you could probably speak to some of those as well, and continued to occupy, and to the point where there's zero greenhouse space available in the RTP, which is again a problem. Longfellow is one of the groups trying to solve that and kick off a greenhouse at one of our facilities. But really the diversity of company sizes and types of research and types of therapies that are being pursued in our region is tremendous. And then, also for speaking just directly to demand, continued demand and health through a pandemic, in that regard, I mean, being located adjacent to 3 Tier 1 universities is tremendous. NC State and UNC and Duke, spinning out technology and spinning out talent is huge. 120,000 students enroll in the Triangle every year, and 5,000 graduate with STEM degrees. Is huge for the workforce attraction. We keep our workforce here. We have 3 great downtowns and great suburban areas for people to grow families and live, the lifestyle they want to live. So I think, those are just a few of the fundamentals. I'll stop talking and let somebody else jump in. But I think those are a few of the fundamentals that I see off the top of my head.
Yeah, I think Neil, your comment on diversity is really important because it really is multidimensional. And having small companies where you might be a professor at a university, but then also, maybe that startup doesn't work. You stay in this area and you end up being at a different, more mature startup potentially. The ability to jump around and have companies of different sizes, I think is really important to keeping the strength of the entire geographical area. So that's a huge trend to us. I think another interesting kind of element of diversity you could say is that, we've really seen in the last decade a trend in big pharma and big biotech towards outsourcing. And so that means everything from, you can take that term outsourcing in a lot of different ways, but, we see it a lot in the kind of the shift towards a lot of the big guys wanting to acquire technology from small startups versus try to do it all in-house from inception to commercialization and sales, right? So and initially too, like that was a little bit of a change that was maybe uncomfortable for RTP because again, since the 50s, we were founded on these kind of like headquarters-y type huge, sort of the old school model of big pharma, right? That had everything in-house. And then when that kind of started to go away, it was like, well, what's going to happen to RTP? And I think what has happened is we see that, the knowledge and the science is still here. Again, like those people don't want to move away. And what's happening is they're starting a company where they're out licensing technology or they're getting acquired, they're doing partnership deals. And so again, pharma and big biotech and stuff, it has outsourced some of that R&D in that way. Also, it goes all the way up to the manufacturing. Again, a huge trend. And I know, Bill, you're seeing it every day with calls from people, site selectors. I mean, we're seeing a huge influx of interest in this area from, gene therapy, but also traditional pharmaceutical manufacturing. So there's CGMP requirements. And so, that is also something where, we're seeing kind of, again, that's a true form of outsourcing, right? Not manufacturing in-house in your own factory. And so again, it's not saying that the entire industry is going that way, but for us to be a home for both the outsourcing parties as well as the in-house, we do it all in-house kind of groups like a Precision or whatever. It's good to have both of them because what that does is give us stability no matter what something like a pandemic or whatever the next kind of big surprise or curveball, comes our way, that we have, sort of a really wide base to weather a storm, or something that could potentially cause a downturn. So I think that's a really interesting take on diversity as far as, and again, too, remember these contractors, those are from, Neil's perspective, from looking at credit and looking at a company, those are companies that are not waiting a decade to create revenue. Those are companies that are manufacturing, have contracts in place with other companies and therefore are generating revenue. And again, you talk to anybody in the pharma industry, and it's like, those spaces to get time in manufacturing, in the lines, et cetera, or to have your drug in the queue, like are coveted and highly protected. And, even if something's going on, you're like, gosh, I don't want to work with a CDMO, but I don't have anywhere else to go. So it's almost like, again, you're seeing that tightness in the real estate industry actually translated even in the CDMO industry. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, really, am I echoing? I think that's better. I agree with really everything Neil and Deb were saying, and saying it much better than I could. I mean, the big picture thing I kind of hang my hat on when I back up is just the issues being addressed by companies in this region, food security, medical innovations. All of those concerns only get highlighted during a pandemic. They don't go away. So, I think the work being done in this region is incredibly important. And I kind of said this earlier, but not just for our economy, but for the world. And so it feels really great to be a part of that here. So, I think what's being done is only more important. And then that means that we've got to enable this work. And then I really agree too also with what Neil was saying, having Duke, UNC, Chapel Hill all right here is a huge resource. I mean, and that lends to that diversity of types of users. I mean, as an architectural firm, we've worked on everything from someone's first upfit of a space from the first grant they ever get coming out of Chapel Hill to like the final campus that happens, 50 years later. And that's all happening like room to grow within this space. And I don't know the other markets as well in other cities, but I don't know if there's always that room to grow or financially it's feasible to grow within that same area and having the same people on board. So there's just a lot of opportunity here that I think makes this area pretty special.
I think another thing that I would add to that is maybe expanding on the talent conversation. We are very fortunate to have all the major universities. We're also very fortunate to have, Wake Tech, Durham Tech, NC Central, et cetera, who are providing a diversity of job opportunities. So, the different programs at these colleges, producing lab techs, for example. We are very fortunate to have the big universities, but the partnership with Wake Tech, for example, or Durham Tech with a company who's then commits to training employees, to serve certain needs within the labs is huge for our region. In fact, I was just talking to a group that the director of real estate for a group that just located here, and he was saying that one of the main reasons they located was the partnership with the technology colleges to produce, to train and produce the workforce that they needed. And so it's also a great opportunity for that as well.
Very good point.
Yeah, those are all fantastic comments. I couldn't agree more. I think, having been in this business in this area for, as Deb said, getting older, I won't say how long, but long enough to have seen this market evolve. I think we are it's a little bit of a perfect storm, right? I mean, I think the growth that we've seen in the market, we've all kind of noted how COVID has amplified the value and importance of life sciences. And so a lot of communities are seeing that, not just on the industrial side, but, on the government side, the folks that are involved in incentive negotiations at the city council level. Everybody's seeing that this is an important area. And Neil, I'm glad you brought up talent, because as much as I would love for all of us to think, and we do the same at the center, that we're the reason everybody comes, we don't have the talent, we're probably not here having this conversation. And so, you know, one of the really important things that I'll just throw out to this crew that we work hard at the center is continuing to integrate the community in the conversation. I think it's one of the things we do really well in the Triangle is to continue the conversations around space, what it looks like, what are the needs, how do we, you know, how do we build more, what are the needs of the community, but in the same context as working with the community colleges and the universities around the talent. So we're filling that need so that we, in some regards, just don't get in our own way of what is a really attractive environment right now. And is the, you know, particularly as we're talking about, you know, urban density and the value of this mid-sized community, and some of the business fundamentals here relative to cost and other locations. It really is it's a very compelling time, so I think for the state and the life science space as well as for this region in particular. One quick note, and Anne, I may ask you to pop in. Did we want people to, if they have questions, to start throwing those into the chat so that when we get to the question period, we've got a list of those? I just didn't want to forget that. Or do you want to just handle all that at the end?
No,
Yeah,
let's, if I failed to mention, if you guys have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, please.
And then Anne's going to kind of keep an eye on those. Remember, here in about 20 minutes, we'll all go into our individual chat rooms. And then when we come out of those chat rooms, Anne's going to have a collection of all your questions to put back out to everybody on the panel for the last 15 minutes. So feel free to throw those into the chat. Okay, so this was the very optimistic part of, you know, we've concluded, while Neil's knocking wood, that we are for the moment pandemic proof. This is a growing sector. But let's go to Neil's, and Deb talked about this too. I don't want to say skepticism, but being aware of where we're going, right? So talk a little bit, crew, about what, especially Neil. Let me start with you. You've been in the market now for a while. What have you learned as a developer, specifically in life sciences, and everything we've just talked about as we go forward, right? What's the cautionary tale here? Should everybody on this call who's in the business of investing in or developing just start building lab space because this is going to go on forever? How are you packaging kind of where we are today and how you see that kind of evolving going forward?
Yeah, the crystal ball question. So yeah, I mean, I think this market is very well positioned to continue to grow for all the reasons we've talked about. I think you know, from a talent standpoint, from an adjacency to one of the stats from the 2019 JLL report, and I hope I'm getting this number right. I believe it was 85% of all companies choose their location based on adjacency to research institutions and adjacency to other research companies. So they want to be near universities, near talent, and they want to be near other universities. Life science companies tend to cluster. So we are very blessed in this market to have that dynamic pre-exist. We're very blessed in the 1950s. A group of people decided to convert the RTP from an agrarian economy to a knowledge economy, and that the universities followed suit. So, you know, from that perspective, we have a lot to be grateful for. I think the things that I think we need to continue to focus on is VC access to VC funding for our startups. So as I look across the country and I look at Boston and San Francisco, every time you hear about a startup, it's, you know, ABC Bio, that's a XYZ venture company. And so it's always startup associated with venture funding, or venture funding has a new group that they funded. We need to call them. And I don't hear so much of that here. And I think that that's not indicative of of necessarily they're being funded or not. It's more indicative of our acknowledgement that it's just not as common to have all of those groups here seeking opportunities. The good news is that there's that this is a place where VC groups will want to invest. There have been a lot of successful exits, a lot of successful IPOs, and so venture groups will follow profitability and follow deal opportunities, and there are those deal opportunities here. But continued focus on getting groups to have seats here and have people here generating opportunities and generating funding opportunities for these startups will be critical. I think continued competitiveness around economic development. We've done, I think the state and local groups have done a great job at partnering and really pursuing deals. I think not taking our foot off the pedal, continuing to push hard. I think it's a baseline now if you want to be considered as a market that there's a strong economic development package, push, state participation, et cetera. So I think everybody's done a great job, and we should count our blessings, but continue to work hard and continue to work on what's been successful. I think the RTP's continued execution of its plan to become a collaborative and active environment is crucial to the health of the RTP specifically. I know that they've kicked off plans with Park Center, and look forward to seeing that continue to develop as a hub for RTP. And then I think central business district options. So, would love to see a Raleigh option. That most likely center for that is Centennial Campus, probably right now. But I think that eventually there'll be a hub in Raleigh that's developed and will be a cluster for groups. But I think that's probably longer term. I think more immediately, downtown Durham has 0% vacancy. And there is a lot of lab space in downtown Durham. It doesn't get talked a lot about because there's no availability. But Longfellow is about to bring 100,000 square feet of lab space onto the market that will deliver in the summer of 2021. We have 3 more pad sites. We're going to build lab buildings. There's other developers who are circling around the downtown and have sites and will execute. And so I think the growth of downtown options would be very healthy for the diversity of users who are either organically grown here or coming from other markets, and having the option to choose an RTP option or choose a downtown amenity adjacent option will be great for us. Those are the things that come to mind.
Yeah, I've always thought, when we've been out doing company pitches, we do have, diversity and flexibility that continues to kind of be the theme here, right? I mean, not only in terms of types of companies, but also in kind of the space options, the community options that we can go to. So on that topic, Deb, as we've discussed, you've done this a while. Pull your crystal ball out. Tell me what you think are some lessons to be learned here, some things to be cautious about, and where you see things going.
I pulled my pen out and I was taking notes while Neil was talking, because my brain is not what it used to be, and I got to remind myself of like all these points. Neil, you talked about like kind of the VC funding and how that's just kind of one of those soft spots that we have that it's frustrating. But so I would say too is that it's an easy concept, but it's hard to get that VC funding and that environment and that ecosystem here. I mean, it's just not something that even happens over 5 years, right? And I would posit that like 10 years ago, we actually had a more robust kind of local sort of VC, regional VC type kind of environment, and that it's not as it's not as visible right now. And again, a lot of the big pharma or the kind of the big biotech deals, the big biobuck deals, they're being led by much bigger, VC groups, kind of out of Boston, out of the San Francisco Bay Area, et cetera. So, it's a little bit of the evolution of, again, Series A fundings have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger over the past several years. And then also just our market where we're located. So I think that's a really good point. And it's one though that people shouldn't hang their hat on like that's going to magically change quickly, just because we have all those other pieces there. You know, again, with the education, talent, you know, the space, you know, or we have land that's relatively cheap relative to Boston or San Francisco, right? But just because we have all those things doesn't mean that we suddenly have, you know, the big dog VC firms locally. That being said, I think the more companies that are funded by those kinds of guys that then have maybe their second footprint, right? The East Coast operations of maybe a San Francisco headquartered company, you know, the more of those companies that happen, the more we're on the radar, and it is a matter of time, a long process, but you know, it's a matter of time before, you know, they do probably put you know, sort of a satellite office here, et cetera, and build that ecosystem. And that then you know, kind of teases out another concept that I actually put a quick post on LinkedIn recently about, which is sort of the hub and spoke model coming to the life science world. It's been around in the tech world forever. And it's not as prevalent in the life science world. Again, you know, we talked earlier about the traditional model has been, you know, big pharma, big biotech doing everything in-house. And now it's starting to outsource things. And again, it's so that it can move faster and be a little bit more nimble. But we're also seeing a lot of kind of a few different hub and spoke model companies. I'm thinking of the Vant groups, I'm thinking about the Nant groups, and thinking about Bridge Bio. And those are all kind of groups that do, you know, kind of this hub and spoke model where they have separate companies for different, you know, potential therapies. And again, that's an opportunity where we may be able to land one or several of those kind of the spokes, right? Where we may not be the headquarters. Palo Alto is still going to be that headquarters spot or what have you. But where, you know, one of their seeds does really well here. And so they're going to probably send a few more this way. And so I think that's an interesting trend to follow as well, to see if that continues to grow, and if there's more groups that are kind of tied and pick up on that model. You know, kind of the crystal ball, you know, if I step back really, Bill, and look at you know, the industry, again, I think Julia, you might have you know, kind of alluded to this, is that, you know, the pandemic has really illuminated life sciences in a way that, you know, I think, you know, people, the average person didn't really understand the difference between like preclinical and a phase 2 or 3 trial and all, you know, these kinds of things. And now that's sort of like on the daily news. So, you know, I think there's a lot more awareness of this industry and all the different ways you get a drug to market. I mean, everybody's like, when are we going to get a vaccine, right? And then suddenly understanding all the different, okay, there's got to be a device, pre-filled syringes, what's the difference between a pre-filled syringe versus like a glass vial, all those kinds of things, right? So I do think that there's an increased awareness. I think if there's any sort of cautionary tale or what have you, Bill, I mean, it's just that, you know, what I see is that it is a very strong, very robust, steady market. Again, it's just a market that's always about long-term investment, long horizons, just by the very nature of the fact that to get a therapy into a human being's body is a long game process. And you just don't think of the idea overnight and suddenly you're taking a pill, right? So because of that, it gives us that stability, but it also means that you know, we're not an exponential growth market. Definitely, you know, continuing to grow. And I think that when you compare us to other hub markets, other life science hubs, that we probably have more opportunity, right, for growth, because I think we'll actually take away some market share from some of these other markets, you know, especially ones that maybe people are starting to shift to a hub and spoke, right? Maybe they, instead of having everything located in the high rent dollar Cambridge market, they're like, well, let's keep a little bit here and you know, spread it out. I think we can be the recipient of some of that. But again, I mean, I think the only thing would be that it's not exponential growth. It is steady and stable growth. And so to that end, I mean, again, I'm a tenant rep broker, so I'd love to see lots and lots and lots of options, right? I want everybody to be building as many spec lab spaces as possible. I think at the end of the day, there is always a risk. I mean, again, spec lab space is a heck of a lot more expensive than spec office, right? So there is more possibility for somebody if there is a little bit of a game of musical chairs and it gets, you know, kind of like over flooded, there is a possibility of, you know, again, somebody left not making the pro forma work. But again, I want to see lots of competition. I want to see lots of options for our clients. But I guess that would be the kind of only concept that I would share.
Deb, I'm gonna take Bill's role for a minute and ask you a question.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm hearing some feedback here. From your perspective, you know, as you're working with tenants, do you can you talk about the importance of the biolabs, incubators, the need for kind of graduation space, and then you mentioned like the cost to build spec labs, and the smaller the space, you lose the economies. The more it costs, the less developers can afford to build those small spaces. But do you see a threat to our market? Is there a threat to our market of having few options for some of these post idea first space need companies who maybe need, you know, 5,000 to 10,000 feet, and you know, I'm sure you work with users all the time who have these kind of needs.
Yep.
And how that might affect our market going forward.
So yeah, the biolabs model, and I mean, Ed's great, and I mean, they're so important. It serves that graduation out of the, you know, out of the university, for instance, or somebody's garage, so to speak. In my experience, though, we have, I mean, and again, this may be self-selecting because there are people that are working obviously with a broker and are trying to find space that is not biolabs, right? Because biolabs is there and they can call them directly and they're well marketed and all that stuff, right? So I want to address and acknowledge that that's a self-selecting sample set. That being said, you know, the clients that we work with, and sometimes we even bring up biolabs to them, most of them go, we're past that stage. We can't be in an open bench. You know, we have IP issues, or, you know, we've done this corporate collaboration to give us some more money to, you know, do both. But now we can't keep our, you know, our experiments out in the open, like, and, you know, that kind of thing. So, in my very narrow point of view, I feel like that sort of open benching area, and again, I mean, Ed might have a different opinion on it, Ed Fields, but my opinion is that is not as useful to this market. It is super oversubscribed for those small secured individual suites, right? He doesn't have enough of those. So those are a key part of the ecosystem. And I think you could probably just do without the shared benching kind of concept, right? Somebody was just it will just make it work for 6 more months in their university lab or whatever, or virtually or something. And I think that those really small spaces, you know, again, it's the model. I mean, Alexandria was one of the pioneers. They never wanted to call it an incubator. They were innovation centers, like the 70-20 Kit Creek, right? Pretty small, but they were individual. They were not shared areas, but there were common cold rooms, common autoclaves, all those other things. I think those are really good concepts, and, you know, super successful. And I mean, one of the biggest challenges with like 70-20 Kit Creek, and again, Oliver, I don't think it's on this call, but I've told this to him to his face, is that, you know, one company starts to take down multiple because it's so convenient and easy. And then you're like, well, now it's the incubator's dilemma. Like, you know, really with an incubator, you have to have a deadline and you kick people out so that more small groups can incubate. And when you don't do that, and one user or 2 or 3 users take up the entire building of these small little suites, then that becomes a challenge. But again, I think it's something that they're working on with some of their new development and offering more of that space. But
we've got about 4 minutes until we're going to jump into the chat rooms, and I'm going to challenge the team to try to address 2 things in 4 minutes. So first of all, Julia, I want to give you a minute to, we haven't been able to look into your crystal ball yet, so take a quick look into yours and let us know what you're seeing. And then I'm going to challenge everybody, and I'll just leave it open until we get 12:30, to just talk about how they see this market in comparison to some other markets. So Julie, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I was going to joke earlier that I lost my crystal ball in February, unfortunately, around mid-February. I don't have a crystal ball, but I will say that I wanted to go back to something that Neil touched on. That's one of the most exciting parts of this local, what we're happening locally, which is kind of this reinvention of RTP, which has been going on for quite a while. And, you know, moving away from this kind of siloed approach to the community and more of a network of companies that are building and growing and learning from each other. And that's kind of a broad response, but I think it speaks to just having an event like this where we're kind of learning from each other, and the idea that architecturally and land planning wise, we're starting to relate to that network better. I feel like that's something that can only strengthen our community, and it's something that each individual component is realizing they're a part of. And so I think that's something that I think is a lot of opportunity there. And it seems like a really broad answer, but it's very important to kind of building our presence nationally and internationally.
Excellent. Thank you. Great point. All right, we've got, and I will cut you off. So be brief. Neil, Deb, Julia, and Neil, you probably have a really good perspective on this because you're in many markets. Give us your 1 minute on how this market is comparing to others as you think about where we are and where we're going.
I think our market has a lot of growth. You know, as I think about rental rates specifically and economics, you know, we look at Boston, in Cambridge, people are paying over $100 a foot. Again, that gets back to the fact that life science companies want to cluster. There's a reason that they don't want to go 5 and 6 miles. They're willing to pay, you know, $100 a foot. You know, in Boston specifically, you're seeing some submarket expansion. You're seeing, you know, submarkets in West Cambridge, for example, where we work on some buildings that we're converting office space to lab space, and it's been very successful. You know, you're seeing some of the groups sprawl out to places like Lexington and Bedford. You know, in San Francisco and Palo Alto, space continues to be in high demand, and rental rates are pushing, you know, there in San Francisco, again, $80 to $100 a foot, you know, down in the Bay Area, you know, $70 to $80 a foot, and some little cheaper in San Diego, but still, I mean, as you compare it to our market here and RTP lab rates in the mid to low 30s, and then downtown lab rates in the 40s, we're still a big value. And we have the cluster opportunity and the adjacency to research institutions. So, you know, I think as I look at other markets, you know, everybody seems to be pretty healthy. A lot of demand and that we're tracking in our assets across the market. And so I think, you know, as we compare ourselves to that, you know, if we were to say what's our advantage to other markets, I think one of the key things is the value. I think another key thing, and I'm probably coming up on a minute, and if it's like the presidential debates last night, I'll actually try to use just my time. But one of the key things is we have great sites and very well located assets, you know, near amenities. So you can get a really nice property in RTP with relatively good access to amenities, you know, for a mid-30s rate. And if you're a gene therapy company and you want to build a biomanufacturing CGMP facility, you can do that right in the heart of RTP. You don't have to go, you know, 30, 40, 60 miles down the road. You can if you want to. We have that option too. But if you want to be like a Grail, you can come right here and be right in the heart of RTP and have your manufacturing or production center and enjoy the access to talent and access to amenities. So, you know, I think, you know, all markets are performing well, but I think those are some of the advantages that this market has over those.
I think I heard Neil. Oops, I'm echoing. I think I heard Neil try to suggest that his downtown product is going to have a 4 in front of the rent. And I almost spit my water out on my computer.
That's just a deal, Deb. It's a deal.
You know, we knew we would have this problem. There's lots of other questions that we could ask, but we have hit 12:30, so The format's going to allow us now to, I think we're going to be put in 4 different chat rooms with each of the 4 of us. So I want to apologize up front. If you randomly got my group, I'm really sorry. I didn't have anything to do with that. Ann, I'm going to pass it off to you to carry it from here on out.
Sure, thank you. So you should have a prompt on your screen letting you know which breakout room you're in if you'll just join it, and in 15 minutes we'll come back as a group and we've got a couple questions for the panel. Thank you. Do you guys see it? Let me know. Mine's up. Okay, thanks. So, Jessica, hey, is everybody coming back on, or is this just our group?
Everybody is coming back on.
Okay, so I'll
But
give it just a minute. Go ahead, sorry.
you may have lost a few along the
Okay.
way, but they have 3 more seconds to.
Okay, that's fine. The chat window that was up before doesn't seem to be there for questions. There it is. Found
I
it.
see it, yeah.
I see it.
I love how the program just like cut me off. They're like, shut the you know what up. We do not want to hear you, right? I had like a clincher comment too.
Oh, do you want to, we have 15 minutes. Do you want to say what the question was and give your answer?
I'm just joking.
I'm excited about it, Deb. I'm calling you back if you don't want to jam it down now.
Well, and
We want to hear it,
people
Deb.
like, oh my gosh, Ann Stewart, Deb was talking about you.
Awesome. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the breakout session. So we had a couple of questions that we talked about in one of our groups, but I'm going to go ahead and put it out to all the panelists. So the first one is from John Mickles. What submarket outside of RTP and downtown Durham do you all see as the next hot submarket for life science leasing and development? And I know we touched a little bit on that, but, and John, if you want to expand on your question, please feel free to.
Neil's not going to give you that secret.
Yeah. Everybody get their pens out and write down exactly what Deb says. Yeah, John, I think that's a good question. You know, I think that like I said, I mean, our RTP is going to continue to get its lion's share of opportunities just based on its location. Directly in the heart of the triangle. I mean, I think downtown Durham is going to continue. There's already the legacy with Duke in the city of medicine. It's going to continue. I hope to see its lion's share of opportunities. And then, you know, I think Chapel Hill and NC State have, you know, in downtown Raleigh have great opportunities. It's just going to take the cluster approach, and somebody's got to start the snowball and then be able to attract more and more you know, research groups around a centralized, you know, research location or company or building. You know, I think Centennial Campus has a lot of opportunity. It's on NC State's campus, and I think everybody would agree that, you know, public universities just move a little bit slower. And so it's going to happen. It will happen. It's a great opportunity. It's an amazing location. State has the capacity to transact and will. They've proven that, and there have been some successful exits, you know, with different developers, and so it's a great location. It just, I think, the more that's there and the more that's built, the more will come and more will be built. It's an incremental growth curve. So, I think, you know, as we look at like Holly Springs and Garner, I mean, there's some huge developments or some huge owner-occupied campuses out there. Looking at, you know, contractors on this phone call who are building space out there for some of these groups, and I think there'll continue to be opportunities for those groups. Maybe it's a gene therapy company who, you know, is mostly automated, that doesn't care so much about being near to talent because they don't need that much, and they want lower cost of real estate. So maybe they go to Holly Springs or Garner, et cetera, to build their facility out. You know, we've had some of those that have looked around in the past at those options. So I continue to believe strongly in the Triangle and the RTP as being our top location. But you know, and obviously I should mention North Durham. I mean, has a large campus up there with, you know, KBI and other groups that have facilities around Trayburn. So, you know, but I continue to think the majority of growth will happen within Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and RTP. But Deb, Julia, would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, there's still land in RTP, right, in the media I-40 corridor. So until that's all gone, like, that's still going to be kind of right central, like the ground zero, you know, point. But to your point with Holly Springs, and, you know, that in kind of that area, like, you know, I think too, you know, you said maybe if they don't mind being farther away from talent. I think what you're seeing is with our area from a residential point of view, becoming an area where we're attracting new residents to North Carolina. You're seeing, I mean, you know, you can only build so many houses inside the Beltline, like, you know, or in Chapel Hill or et cetera. So you're seeing those areas blow up, and with all ranges. I mean, it's, you know, executive housing and, you know, we got 12 Oak down right next to Securus. And so I think you'll find that pretty soon you're going to get a CEO that maybe moved down here from New Jersey, you know, pharma, or from Boston or whatever, who's down now, lives in Holly Springs. And he goes, heck, I'd love to have a 10-15 minute commute into my, you know, office or our, and suddenly you know, you get one of those, and then they, you know, the employees tend to be, you know, the people looking for jobs probably are looking there first if they live in that area, right? And so I do think that that's probably an area that will be interesting. It's also in Wake County, so great schools, you know, it's, again, for that sort of highly educated workforce that you're looking for, you know, they're looking for that for their families. So yeah, I outside of I-40, you know, I still scratch my head and wonder why, well, and there's a lot of reasons that we don't have time to go into, but like, I still feel like there should be more in Raleigh as well. I mean, again, because you have the talent, you have the easy access, et cetera. And then honestly too, you know, one of the interesting things that, again, and with a positive spin on COVID, is that, you know, the grind, the RTP, the commute into the RTP and out, right, that can be a grind for somebody living, you know, in Raleigh or whatever, and doing that. Even though, again, if you come here from Chicago or something else, like, it's not a big deal, right? It's just normal. I think that one of the interesting things that will be interesting to see is if this COVID year has modified behavior and acceptance of some level of flex working, such that the traffic, people can come in, you know, again, do their heads down, emails, all that kind of stuff, you know, until 9:30 in the morning, hop in the car. And now instead of a 45, 50-minute commute, they're taking a 25, 30-minute commute, right? Good for the company, good for the mental health of the employee, and, you know, everybody. So, you know, again, I feel like this year has accelerated potentially an acceptance of that kind of a concept. Very, you know, in a short period of time, so that when things are coming back, and they are right now, as they are coming back, you know, I wonder if that, you know, and I'm not saying that necessarily to emphasize a specific geographical area. I feel like that's going to impact somehow, in a positive way, right? RTP, and then just, you know, development, and again, people returning to work for the work they need to do. That can only happen with, you know, interacting and, you know, synergies with other people. And then the stuff where they're like, honestly, I don't want somebody popping into my office every other minute. I need like quiet. You know, they're able to do that at home with a company that supports that and goes like, yeah, I know you're not just like jerking off, like you're doing this. You're not at the grocery store also, you know, watching your kid and all that kind of stuff. So
I agree with both of you here. And actually, I was kind of thinking myself, like, where are we developing that we weren't expecting to? And follow, you know, if we lose kind of the quality of life of why people move here, that's going to be a huge detractor for a lot of the growth we're trying to develop. And you know, if we look to the residential sector for where that's developing, I'm going to use like Wendell Falls as an example. I mean, that's literally like an entirely new giant town within a town that already existed. In Wendell, by the time you drive to RTP from Wendell, what is that, like 45 minutes at least, if not further? So like really looking at like where people are living. And you're right, Deb, if someone moves here from Chicago or New York, this is not a big deal, but they're kind of moving here to me so that they don't have to do that anymore. So if we lose that quality of life and why people want to be here, the draw that talent pool is not going to be there as much as it was. So I think we have to focus on like why people want to be here to do this kind of work, and not getting away from the local community is really key.
Great. So we have one more question. We have about 4 minutes. So this is an interesting one. This is from Heather Askins. Are any foreign life science companies allowing the upcoming election to affect their decisions to move to the U.S.? Are taxes a deal-breaking factor, or what other potentially changing variables based on the election results are influencing their decisions? Who would like to take this?
Thanks for the layup, Heather.
You know, that's a loaded question. Let's see what you guys
I'm gonna let Deb go first this time.
You know, I actually haven't had a lot of discussion with clients related to election. Again, you know, election something that happens every 4 years, and these are industries that are looking, you know, at things that they're going to sell that might not be for sale for another decade, right? So I think in some aspects, you know, there are definitely issues relative to like reimbursements and all this sorts of stuff that like definitely impacts the life science world. But I haven't really heard it discussed relative to the real estate decisions recently. Honestly, the only thing that I've heard recently related to election has been some discussion relative to municipality or state's desire to announce things prior to the election, and therefore maybe, you know, a little, you know, put that in our pocket, whereas if we can meet the timing, they have a huge incentive to be able to announce it before X date, and therefore, you know, we might be able to kind of swing the scales beneficially, you know, to our benefit, but that, you know, for an incentives negotiation. But that's really all I've heard, and that's really about not about a presidential thing, and that was more like a, you know, again, local or state, you know, kind of level government wanting to be able to make some sort of announcement. So that's kind of all I've seen on my side.
Okay. Neil, anyone else have any input there?
I don't really have a lot of input.
Okay.
I'm with Deb. I'm not hearing a lot about that conversation. You know, I think if we look historically, everything that affects our life science demand across the country, you know, historically is trending in the right way. So continuing to have, you know, a lot of FDA approvals, you know, the historical average for FDA approvals is about 37 a year. 2018, we had 59. 2019, we had 48. This year, we're trending to beat last year. NIH funding is up 7% in the 2020 budget to about $42 billion. So, I mean, I don't know that we've heard a lot from, you know, either party talking about cutting funding, which is very important to us. You know, I think, you know, especially like we said, with, if anything, the COVID pandemic has put a spotlight on healthcare, and has put a spotlight on underlying the need to continue to pursue therapies and treatments for underlying conditions. So it's almost been like, you know, I mentioned this to Bill earlier, it's almost like gas on a fire in a lot of ways for these startups to continue to pursue, you know, to take an idea, you know, from out of a university that's ultimately designed to save a life or to improve the lives of a patient, you know, through to get their FDA approval. So if approvals are up and funding's there, you know, the companies are going to continue to pursue, you know, these therapies. So yeah, again, I said I didn't have a lot to add, but I said more than I meant to. But no, I don't have a big read on if companies are, you know, what their contingency plans are for the election. But I hope that healthcare funding, you know, supersedes, you know, any of these political issues.
And like Neil, like I haven't seen any major like onshoring, like glut or rush or anything. I mean, it's definitely something that's been talked about, et cetera, but I haven't seen something like, oh my gosh, we've got like every manufacturer that we're dealing with is somebody who was manufacturing in China and is now coming to the US. Like I have not seen any sort of seismic shift in that. So I think that there's an awareness of like, ooh, we want to make sure that we're able, you know, kind of to control our supply chain and everything. But that, I think that's been just a global concept, right? That has kind of people's eyes have opened to this year.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay, great. Well, we're a little after 1, so we're going to wrap this up. On behalf of NAIOP, I would like to thank Bill, Deb, Neil, and Julia for participating. It's been really great working with you guys on this program. I think it was very successful. And anyway, I hope everyone has a good rest of your week, and we'll see you soon, hopefully. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.